Hello everyone, this is a review of the first episode of the Orville, and I really love this show so far, more and more with each episode. Each episode is better than the last in my opinion, and this one I think is my favorite one so far. It really has that Star Trek feel to it, and visually the show continues to be great. It has the style of TNG, only with newer, better modern special effects, while still keeping the same tone and style of TNG. And even the comedy is better now. I think the comedy now flows better with the story and doesn't feel forced as it was in the beginning. And Isaac the android was really like Data in this episode. When Lieutenant Malloy called him a dick, he quickly did the research and then said that since humans take pride in their sexual organs, then what Malloy called him is actually a compliment. And that was such a Data moment, because Data was always misunderstanding things like this in a hilarious fashion, and so he had a lot of Data-like moments throughout this episode, so I loved it. Also, this episode actually had an original science fiction idea. Not completely original, that idea did float around, but the way they did it in this episode actually felt fresh, like a new science fiction idea which was not explored properly in any previous movie or show. So they find this giant alien ship, and my first thought when I saw it was a Borg cube, but it's not, and almost the entire bridge crew goes over to the alien ship to investigate. And by the way, that is something they always did in Star Trek, and it was always a bit silly and stupid, how the entire bridge crew goes somewhere on a mission and leaving the ship under the command of maybe one guy. But you know, here I'm fine with that because it's a comedy show, so this kind of stuff is acceptable in this show. If it was done on a serious show, then I would complain about it probably, but here it's okay. And so they enter the alien ship, and it's a huge structure inside of it, so that was a great science fiction moment. Very good visuals, it had that forbidden planet feel to it, and inside the ship they find a huge artificial environment with people living in it, and the people are basically primitives, they're all farmers and stuff, and they don't know anything about the outside universe. They think that's the whole universe is what they see, and they all follow a strict religion that doesn't allow them to question anything. And this also is the same kind of free thought idea as in many Trek shows, and some thought-provoking idea, because it turns out like this society discovers that they're literally living inside a giant metal turtle in space, and that goes against the religion, and so some of them refuse to believe it, and there is a kind of theocracy which is trying to suppress the truth. So overall a great science fiction episode. And by the way, Liam Neeson had a small but important role, so that was also cool. And speaking of cameos, apparently Patrick Stewart will indeed have a cameo on the Orville in the near future, which is something I kind of predicted, I kind of hoped for it, and so I'm very happy that it will indeed happen. And I knew that Seth MacFarlane is actually a friend of Patrick Stewart, so I think that's why he makes cameos in all of his productions. Like any show or any movie he is doing, Patrick Stewart always has at least a voiceover somewhere. Even in A Million Ways to Die in the West, Patrick had like a few lines there. And so I was hoping he'll have a cameo on this show, and apparently there will be, and so I'm very happy about that, especially since it's now apparent that he'll probably never appear in any official Star Trek, since they've basically discarded the Prime timeline with the new prequel Star Trek Discovery, so any hope to see any of the TNG or DS9 or Voyager characters again is basically gone, at least in any official productions, because they basically discarded the Prime timeline, and they are reimagining the universe, basically rebooting it, and so I don't think we'll see any of the old characters in the new Star Trek shows, and Patrick Stewart isn't getting any younger, and so my hope is that maybe we'll see him as a Picard type of character on this show instead. And something that I always wanted to see in an actual Star Trek sequel is to show Picard as the president of the Federation, because to me, like, Picard was always the spirit of the Federation, and he's obviously a very wise and ethical leader, and so having him as the president of the Federation would have been epic, and it's like the best possible conclusion of his story. So that's something I always wanted to see in the future of Star Trek, but as I said, it's not going to happen, so maybe they can do it on this show. Maybe he can show up in Orville as the president of the Planetary Union, or some kind of political leader, maybe the leader of some planet, and I think something like that would be a perfect fit for him. On the other hand, it might be interesting to have him as a villain, so maybe when he first shows up he appears to be a good guy, and then he turns out to be evil, so that might be an unexpected twist, and it might be very cool to have him as a recurring villain even. So I'm really looking forward to see what they'll do with him. And by the way, Scott Bakula is also rumored to appear, and I really wonder what they'll do with him. I think it would be funny if he appears as some kind of time traveler from the future. That would be funny. So overall, I'm really excited for this show, much more than I am about Star Trek Discovery. But it will all depend on their actual stories. If they will actually have good stories, then maybe it will be a good show. And just like if the Orville didn't have great stories, then its visual style would not have saved it. I would have criticized it if it didn't have good stories to go with it, if it was only visuals. So maybe Discovery will also have good stories, and then I will accept it as a good show. So it remains to be seen. So the next episode that comes out, I will also review it. My worry is that STD will be like the SGU of Star Trek. SGU was in a very similar style, and I did like it in a way, like because they did something fresh, they did something different. And it also had like a more realistic feeling to it, a more gritty realistic feeling. So I would have been okay with that visual style, but I think what killed the show was that it was just too boring. There were little to no actual stories, and the stories they did have were dragging out from episode to episode and never coming to any conclusion, so it was just annoying and boring. And so I am kind of worried that STD will be the SGU of the Star Trek franchise and will effectively kill the franchise, but I could be wrong, and if they actually have good stories, then maybe I will change my mind. So we'll wait and see. Also, it's the problem with the whole serialized versus episodic. When they do an episodic show, then they have to come to a conclusion of the story in each and every episode most of the time, and so this way they can't drag out the story over multiple episodes, and therefore I think it's less boring, because each episode has to have some kind of story with beginning and end, and so there are a lot more stories overall in the show. And yet when it's a serialized show, then they can drag it out from episode to episode, never concluding, and it's really annoying, like they keep making you wait. And so it's kind of annoying unless it's done really well, and some shows did do it very well, like Breaking Bad. I was a huge fan of that. But I think in a science fiction show, having each episode be a short story is probably better, even though sometimes if there is a good story, it deserves to be longer. And so sometimes it's too quick. But overall it depends on the stories. If the stories themselves are good, then the series will be good. So we'll have to wait and see. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you all next time.